Okay, so I will walk through how to create more advanced materials inside the Redshift material editor. So this is what we will be recreating. We have a sphere with lots of mixed materials and textures, and also a fair bit of displacement at certain areas. So the only thing I've done so far to set up the scene is to bring in this plane, just a plane to be used as a background, and also this area light. So we will create this sphere to get started. Increase the segments of the sphere to 96. This is super important for the displacement to be look better. And then we will, just for the sake of visibility, go into create Redshift materials, and display standard incandescent material. And then just drag that one onto the plane, so we have this nice clear white background. So in order to create the material for the sphere, we will go into create Redshift materials, just a plain material to get started. Drag that one onto the sphere so we can clearly see what's going on. We can see it constantly being updated here in the Redshift render view. So if we open up the material and click down this menu, it looks fairly the same as the standard C4D material editor does. You have your color settings, reflection, and subsurface scattering, and a bit more advanced options as well. But we're going to focus on the shader graph up here. So if we click the edit shader graph button, we will enter the node system. So once again, let's just place this to get maximum visibility. So right now we only have two nodes. This is the main material, which is connected to the output. So everything that's connected to the output module, that's what you're going to see inside this window here. And this, when you click at the material node, you have the exact same options as we previously looked at, with the color, diffuse, reflection, and what have you. Right now, I want to have this really reflectant material, so let's just choose the iron preset under base properties here. I think it's a bit too shiny, so maybe reduce the weight of the reflection to 0.8, and just to set things up further so it even looks better at the final result, we will go with GGX. This is basically different ways for the software to calculate how the light scatters across the surface, and how the speculars are being calculated. The edges, right now I just think that GGX it provides a more sort of matte and even surface. On the Fresnel type, we'll choose IOR. Standard IOR, and let's just type in an even value like 2 for simplicity's sake, and you can see the speculars, it becomes kind of soft and isn't as hard, so it's much easier to see what's going on. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is to find a texture. So we can type here into the search window texture, and we'll drag this node out here. And we will need a texture. So we can choose a file. If we click this button here with the 3 dots, and we'll go with this pretty high contrasted cracked texture. Yeah, Cinema always try to catch the textures, but we don't need to do that right now. So what do we do with this? If we click the small circle of the texture, we can drag this into the blue sort of square on the material node, and then we'll get a whole bunch of options. This may look pretty intimidating, but this basically, if we look at this and click this one up again, this is the exact same settings we can see over here. So we have the diffuse, the reflection values. So this is basically the exact same thing as looking at this menu here. So we'll drag this over here again and pipe this into the reflection, there it is, the reflection roughness. So now we can see that the reflection values are only being calculated into the texture crackles. But what if I want this to be the opposite? I want the whole globe to be reflective except the crackles. So the roughness of the reflection is calculated inside the crackles instead of like it is now. So then we will need to, we can get us a ramp and drag this one out here. And then we will sort of bypass the texture via this ramp, and we'll input this into, there's only one option, general input. And then again, put this one into the reflection roughness. As we can almost see here, exactly, you can see the reflection roughness here. So, okay, right now everything disappeared. So, what we will try to do is, first, instead of the source being the UV map, we will change this to an alternative source, the alternative source being the texture. And now we're back on track, and then you can see the texture reappearing in the same way it was before. So in order to inverse this, we can click invert. So if we zoom in onto this, we can see, the reflection is being applied everywhere except the cracks. So that's exactly what we want. So the reason I was using a ramp instead of an ordinary color invert is because this ramp here basically works like the levels inside Photoshop. So if we adjust the midpoint, you can see you get more, the blacks are getting more contrasted, and we get this additional sort of grungy textures. So let's just continue with this. We can make this texture even more advanced by simply copying these two by selecting them both and control dragging as I just did. And then we will select another texture just to mix things up, and I have this another black and white, more grungy texture. Okay, whatever, that doesn't matter. So what if I want to pipe both of these textures inside the reflection roughness? Then I have to disconnect this, and I will search for let's see, color layer. There we go. And this is a way of merging different layers, like these two texture layers. So if we, let's just create a bit more surface to work with this. Like that. Okay, so if we pipe this, our first crackled texture inside the base color, and then we put this secondary texture inside the layer 1. So this node basically just merges these two layers. And then we pipe the alt color into the reflection roughness once again. And there we go. This is completely mixed up. But it doesn't really look that great. So what we need to do is have the color layer selected and change the blending mode from normal to average. So right now it sort of creates a composite between the two texture layers. So now we're getting somewhere. This already looks pretty rugged and interesting. So if I just zoom out here by scrolling, we still can make this even more interesting and add even more detail to it. So right now I will search for a normal map right here. A normal map is basically the same as a bump map, but instead of using black and white images, it uses RGB values. So there's a bunch of online services where you can upload images and create these sort of normal maps for this purpose. So check that out. Just Google normal map generator and you'll be able to find a bunch of different options. Right, so now I have this normal map and I will drag this pick whip onto the blue square and go down to overall bump input. So now it's really starting to happen stuff in here. So now all the speculars are starting to get bent in different ways when we apply the normal map. So that's pretty good right now, but we're far from finished. So another super interesting thing with this node editor or shader graph in Redshift is that you can actually mix two different materials. So if we search for material, there we go. Pull this one out here. So this node right here is exactly the same thing as this iron preset we have here. So let's choose another fun preset like gold. Just leave the options as it is. But now we come across a bit of a problem because the output, the surface output, only has sort of one input right now. So we need to blend these two materials together before it actually enters the output node. So then we have this material blender layer. So drag this one out here. And then same thing, it's basically the same thing as the color layer. It's the same thing for materials as the color layer is for these textures. So take the first material, take the pick whip and drag it into the base material, base color. And this one, the new gold material inside layer 1, layer color 1. And it's starting to get a bit cramped in here. So just need to separate things apart. That's good enough. And then pipe the material blender into the output. So nothing seems to happen, and that is because we need to change a few options inside the material blender. First of all, we need to check the layer 1 additive blending mode. So that's the way that the new gold material blends in with the original material. And then also, right now the blend color is set to black, so that means that no information at all is being transferred from this new material. So we need to crank the black values up. White meaning that absolutely all of the information is being transferred. So as you can see, this is way too intense, set to white, so we'll probably go with slightly below 50, like 40% transference. There we go. That's a much nicer blend. So let's just drag these over here so we can see it more clearly. But what if I want... Now the gold is pretty evenly distributed. Minimize that. So it's sort of this... The highlights are getting all of the gold. But what if I want to mix it up a bit further? If we bring up this shader graph here again, we can do a pretty interesting thing with... if we do it like this, if we choose color, search for color invert, drag this out here. Let's just showcase what it will look like before we blend in the color invert. So if we have the color layer up here, so if we drag another pick whip from the alt color into the new gold material, and then we will input this into the reflection roughness here also. And what happens? Now the gold is more evenly distributed, but it uses these textures, since we dragged the merging of the textures up here into the material. Then it uses the textures to calculate as a reference for how it should distribute the gold material. But if we put, instead of directly to the material, if we bypass the color layer to the color invert and onto the material again, it may be a slight difference, but still, I think it looks a bit more interesting with the inversion. If we rotate here, we can see that there's a slight difference. So the gold is sort of more spotted throughout the material, so it doesn't show up in all the places. So it creates this pretty interesting mixed up look. So in order to finish this up, as a final touch, we will add a displacement in here, like so, and we also need a new texture. So search for texture and displacement, and this time we will select the texture. We will select another normal map, but this time, instead of the first one that we used, I've created a new one that doesn't have the texture patterns all over the place. So there are these sort of clear blue patches that will create a pretty interesting dynamic when the texture is applied. And no, we don't want to catch that. So pipe the texture inside the displacement texture map. And right now, this time we will pipe this one, if I can get a hold of it, into the output displacement. And nothing's happening. That is because we need to minimize that and go into the actual sphere object and right click on the object, go to tags up here, Redshift tags, and make the sphere into a Redshift object. And now we will probably see a bunch of different stuff happening. No, I was wrong, because we need to click onto the actual Redshift object tag, go into geometry, check override, and scroll down a bit to displacement, and check enabled, because for some reason Redshift won't be able to read the displacement unless you manually check in these boxes. And to even more clearly see what's going on, we can type in a higher value like 15. Now we can see things going on. It still doesn't really look that great. Let me just undock this panel so we can clearly see what's going on. That's because I'm still in the progressive render mode. So if I enable bucket rendering here, we should be able to see something happen. Okay, so the render took a bit longer than expected, but as you can see, we created this pretty interesting mixer textures. The two materials, the gold and iron, mixes pretty in an interesting way in all the crevices of these mountains, or what you would call them. So this is a great way to like create small planetary objects or whatever you can think of. I mean, there's infinite amounts of ways to go about this, but this is just one example of many. So the best thing is just to play around with it and see what happens, and do experiments, see what looks good and what doesn't. So that's about it. Thank you for watching and listening.